Are you using your superpowers, or are you holding back the most powerful parts of who you are? I'm talking to Amy Stanton, author of The Feminine Revolution, about how we can fully express ourselves and reframe qualities that we might perceive as weaknesses as our greatest strengths. Amy is such a fantastic example of woman, hear me roar. Years ago, my friend Ashley said to me, "You've got to meet Amy. You're both wolves. You're just meant to run together." And she celebrates other women like nothing you've ever seen. And she was right. Amy is all about impact. For the past 30 years, she has been working in PR and marketing as a fierce advocate for philosophy-driven people and brands, from top doctors and authors to Olympic athletes, progressive startups, and Fortune 100 companies. Amy started her career in New York at big agencies like BBDO, JWT, and others, and then became the head of marketing and communications for New York's Olympic bid before serving as the chief marketing officer for Martha Stewart. She then founded Stanton and Company to champion positive female role models, and it's become one of the leading boutique agencies in the United States with a client roster of women and men that reads like the who's who of experts in the health and wellness space. Amy is a leading voice in female entrepreneurship, leadership, and empowerment, and I am so excited for you to hear what she has to say about unleashing your wild woman. So let's get the skinny from Amy Stanton. Amy, I'm so excited to end our week together like this, having this lovely conversation. You have been studying humans and behavior and celebrating story your entire life. So tell me about some of those it has to be me moments about where that started for you in your family.
That's a great question. I certainly wasn't aware that it had to be me until it's easier to see in hindsight. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I think every family is full of characters and stories and drama and unexpected twists and I was the oldest child, so I carried a lot of responsibility and had a certain amount of, well, pressure, I think most of which was self-inflicted to be perfect and the good girl. And
Oh, wait, so you're like the same first child as all the rest of us?
isn't that weird? First of all, why is that all the first children were cursed with this? I'm not entirely sure, but I will say I was an observer, and I think as much as I participated in life, and it's not like I sat around on the sidelines, I did spend a lot of time kind of watching carefully and trying to track things and understand things at a deeper level. And some of that's just my nature. I don't think that's entirely blamed on older child syndrome, but I definitely wanted to understand the kind of deeper meaning of things and the reason behind them. And I had this incredibly close relationship with my grandparents, and they were like a second pair of parents for me. And in many ways, I think I felt a little bit like a sibling to my mother, as much as she was an epic mom to me and still is. So I had this unique dynamic where I always felt a little bit older and sort of wiser beyond my years. And that's not meant to sound like a good thing, by the way.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think we can look around and say there's a real benefit to kids being able to be kids and have no pressure and limited weight of the world on their shoulders. And a lot of mine might have been self-inflicted, but I think I always carried a lot and always felt a lot of pressure. And I remember for a large part of my life, and like up through even high school and maybe early college days, my grandmother would say, "How are you, Amy?" And I'd often answer, "I'm stressed." And stress was often tied to schoolwork. And, I went to a very competitive high school, which actually was, I think, harder than college in the end. But I really felt stressed. And she would call me on it. She'd say, "Amy, I don't want you to be stressed. Like this is like not at this point in life, I don't want you to be stressed." Now, I still was. It's not like that could be fixed. But I still think back to that and I think how interesting that I was stressed at such a young age,
And what was driving you at that point, to feel like you had to be something or achieve or go harder or push yourself or be perfect or be the good girl or what were you feeling?
all of those things. I honestly can't tell you. I think about this all the time. Even now, I
Yeah.
ask myself the same question. Why am I like this? It's an interesting question, more from a place of curiosity than judgment. But
Yeah.
I think at that time, I had a deep desire to make everyone proud.
Mm.
I really, I felt like we were very high. There was a very a lot of values conversation in my family. My grandparents were both from the South, and my grandfather built himself from nothing and built this wealth and support for our family as his mission and was in many ways the ultimate patriarch. And so I think I felt, yeah, I had a huge amount of respect for him and sort of awe. And then my grandmother was just this boss lady, but not in the ways that we think of that now. Not like current boss babe culture. Definitely not. More like, my grandfather took care of everything and she was kind of the ultimate, like, the feminine in the relationship, but had her sort of deeper powers of how she got things done, and sometimes very directly, not manipulatively. But it was just such a powerful dynamic, and in many ways inspired a lot of the things I think about now. And truthfully, is still a model that I really aspire to, that kind of masculine man and the woman being the feminine in the powerful ways. So I think they were highly influential on me in so many ways, but I I think the self-inflicted pressure was because I wanted to make everybody proud.
Mm. And this balance of full expression of the feminine and full expression of the masculine, that you had these two glorious, nurturing, beautiful examples of that in your life that you had huge respect for, and you were then able to put that manifestation inside of your own consciousness. And you speak broadly about this in the Feminine Revolution, in the book, about how you struggle to hold those two parts of yourself, in balance. Your family were entrepreneurs. Was that part of the stress, that you knew that you wanted to create something, that you were going to become an entrepreneur? Did you know that about yourself or feel
I
that pressure?
knew with certainty that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I had no idea what it would be. But even in elementary school, I was making barrettes and selling them at local street fairs. And I from very early age, was making things and selling them. And sometimes I would just tag on to my parents' businesses wherever they were. I'd be just the cute little girl selling things, but cute things. But in hindsight, it's astounding that anyone bought any of those barrettes. I mean, I hope someone took a photo of those barrettes actually, because those were something else. But I think people were doing a favor for sure. But regardless, I grew up feeling like anything's possible
Oh,
because,
that's a
yes,
great feeling. So did I. I was blessed with
yeah,
that as well.
lucky us,
Oh,
in that regard.
embarrassment of riches. It's so beautiful. So take me into some of these other it has to be me moments. So you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur. You were seeing the opportunity, seeing that anything's possible, being nurtured, loved, and celebrated and supported by your family. Take me into
Yeah.
going to Penn and deciding you were going to study. What was the it has to be me moment there? Like where you decided that's the direction you're going in next?
I don't know if I've decided on a direction, Tess. So it's interesting you say that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I know.
thank you for redirecting me, because I'm making an assumption, right? And I
No,
shouldn't be doing that. So
you can.
then what was it then?
You can. I think what's interesting about life is this perception of control that we all have about aspects of life. I think most of us have realized that we have no control over most things, but we still believe that we might have control over what we eat for lunch or what, basic decision making throughout the day. But I think when I look back at a lot of these moments, things really were in flow in ways that I wasn't aware. So I played tennis in high school. I was number one singles in my high school team. I never felt like I was an athlete or a good tennis player for that matter, because I was at a small private school. Even though Southern California is one of the best tennis markets in the country, I felt like I didn't take myself seriously in that regard at all. And yet it did help. I felt like, okay, maybe this will help with my application. But the ultimate thing that I knew would help with my application was applying to the engineering school, because I was really good at math and science. So I just knew I wanted to go to Penn. God knows why. I mean, to this day, I still think it's funny. I applied early. I decided that's where I wanted to go. I went on a college tour. I saw everything, but I said, I want to go to Penn, applied early as an engineer. Didn't really know what engineering was, truthfully. And you are required to select one engineering class your first semester. So I selected bioengineering. Now, like, of course, in hindsight, that makes sense, because now I work deeply in the health and wellness space. But that makes me laugh, even thinking about all of these moments. Being great in math and science in high school doesn't mean you're going to be an engineer. And that's the sort of high level summary of that story. But I remember getting there and thinking, whoa, I mean, first of all, looking around being like, I am not like the others. And I had this group project in this bioengineering class, and we decided to create an artificial lung. Freshman year. It wasn't only freshmen in that class, but this intro to bioengineering class, that's, you got to do something big. That's the bottom line. So naturally, I was assigned to the marketing and legal section of the project, which was a huge relief, because that's probably the only thing that was tackleable for me at that time. And again, it makes perfect sense. Maybe that was great foreshadowing for later in life, since it definitely was much more aligned with what was realistic and logical and passion point for me, even before I knew it. So that was my last engineering class, and I transferred into the communications school, not because I was so great at marketing the artificial lung, but because I didn't really know what communications was. And I felt the great news about that was I would be able to have a minor at Wharton, and that was important to me, or concentration, it was called. And so there I was in the communication school, going nowhere fast, because I think that's the funny thing about liberal arts. Like, and at that age, like, I didn't, as much as I was very ambitious, I didn't know where it was all going. That's why I laugh when you say, how did you know? I mean, know is a strong word. I just trusted these moments. As we'll talk about intuition in a bit, but I really did feel like I was kind of guided through these different transitions. And then even graduating, when someone said, what do you want to do? I was like, I would look at people that I sort of knew what they did and felt they were a little bit like me, and be like, okay, I think I'm going to go into advertising. I want to move to New York for a couple of years, thinking it really would only be a couple of years. It was not. Before you know it, I'm working in advertising. And that was because I just saw someone that I thought resembled me, went to the Penn, went to the communication school. That's what she did. So seems like a good starting point, knowing eventually I was going to start my own business. So I wanted something that was going to lay the groundwork for that and give me a set of tools. And there's so many things I think about from those early days in advertising, one of which is how powerful it is to understand how to be in service. So in the service industry, how to service clients, how to work as part of a team servicing clients, managing clients, all of this. And I mean, clearly it's a huge part of what I do now. So thank goodness I did that, man. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing as you're speaking is just allowing and surrendering to your intuition and being in flow of what's going on. And that is, we'll talk about this, a form of knowing that we often discount. Every experience gives you the tools for the next experience, and it all does dovetail together. In hindsight, the benefit of it is we look back with 20/20 vision and go, all the breadcrumbs were there and all the pieces of the
Right.
puzzle were coming together. So speaking about being in service, and particularly it being gratifying being in service of something you really believe can make a difference in the world, going back to that template set by your grandparents, of having good values, acting on causes you believe in. What did working on the New York Olympic bid teach you about service and story and celebrating others?
So much. Well, first of all, just to put a pin in the last point, being the fact I really would have described myself as a control freak for most of my life. So the fact that in hindsight, I was going with the flow with all these major life decisions, it's funny. I mean, it really is. And I definitely wasn't aware in the moment that I was trusting the process or trusting my intuition, because in those moments, I'm sure it was very stressful, even though now, we all learn that stress just increases over time. So whatever seemed stressful then, those were minor issues. But yeah, I think, there was a lot of sort of divine intervention with all of those moments in my life. And one of the biggest examples of that was when I was hired for New York's Olympic bid. And one of my mentors and a former boss called me one day and said, Amy, I have the perfect job for you. It's the director of marketing and PR for New York's Olympic bid. I said, Jane, I don't see how this could be the perfect job for me. I don't know anything about sports or the Olympics or New York for that matter. At that point I'd been there about 8 years. So I was fairly familiar, but about the history of New York and everything else. And I said, and by the way, I'm not even sure it's a good idea to bring the Olympics to New York. And she said, Amy, trust me, just go in and meet Dan Doctoroff and let's just see what happens. She was right. So I trusted her. I met him. I fell in love with the whole concept. He's still one of the dearest people in my life to this day. And ultimately, I could never have predicted that. That's the thing. I could never have designed this in my mind. And it was so much more epic than whatever I believed was my next step. And so sometimes when I have to wonder what's next, or if I'm curious about kind of where things are all going, I remember moments like that, because when something more extraordinary than you ever imagined happens, you realize that you didn't need to sort of arm wrestle it for it to happen. It happened. You didn't say exactly what you wanted and then there it was delivered. It was better than what you ever imagined. And how epic is that? So it was hard, though. I won't deny it. The thing that really was the most incredible for me was waking up every morning. This was right after 9/11 that we were trying to bring the Olympics to New York. And it functioned.
Oh, so it was like balm for the soul.
Yes, it really was. And at a time when people felt so incredibly helpless, this was one thing I could do that felt like it was a bright light for the city and something that was bringing some positivity and some hope and a brighter future at a time when we needed it most. So and truthfully, while there's a lot of challenging parts of the Olympic movement, it's highly political in ways that people wouldn't understand, and we definitely don't need to get into that today. But it is sort of at its core a very inspiring thing to be part of, because the athletes, first and foremost, who are all striving to be the best in the world at whatever their respective sports are, just that. I mean, what an energy to be able to feed off of. And I think New York, this is one of the reasons it really was and someday will be a match made in heaven. We lost to London for 2012, but is that the culture of the Olympics and this striving to be the best in the world that is so aligned with the values of New York City. So it really was a match made in heaven in that way at a time that would have been transformative. But what's incredible is Dan's vision for the Olympic bid and his partner Jay, who also was like family to me. Dan and Jay transformed the city, even though we didn't get the Olympics. There are books that have been written about all of the incredible changes that have happened in New York City as a result of the bidding process. So Dan was the head of the deputy mayor for economic and development and rebuilding while we were bidding. So he was able to make some incredibly meaningful changes. The whole west side of Manhattan was transformed because of Dan. The waterfront in Queens, like just major developments that could not have taken place if it wasn't for the bid. So we really were waking up with purpose every day. And I realize the extent to which that is an incredible luxury. But then once you've done that, I caught the bug. I couldn't
and it's
not
a great
wake up
bug to
thinking like
catch
that.
and then keep passing on to others. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. What else? Let's talk about the other seeds that were planted or fertilized or watered during this chapter. This love and passion for championing female athletes and female stories that then dovetailed into you starting your PR company.
Yes. I mean, during the Olympic bid, I was acutely aware of the fact that no one could name 3 female athletes, the average person. And this was now the bid was, I was working on it between 2002 and 2005. So that was a bit ago, just a bit. And
Let's not do the maths on that.
no, it's just around the corner. But the thing that was interesting is, I was so touched by these athletes and their stories. And, Olympic athletes are different from what we traditionally consider professional athletes, although some of them are professional athletes as well. But they are, in most cases, barely making it work and doing everything in service of being the best in the world at this sport. So you think about some of the less high profile sports like fencing or archery or weightlifting or curling or any bobsled, think summer, winter Olympics. There are athletes all over the world that are literally living and breathing these sports because of their pure love and passion for the sport and their desire to be the best. That is very inspiring to me because in a culture where people are so focused on fame and fortune and all these other things, it's incredibly refreshing to meet people who truly just are doing whatever they're doing for the sake of excellence. And I think that's in some ways that's even more inspiring to me now because of things like social media and all the other things that have given us all these other measures to look at that are kind of inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. But have become incredibly important for business today. So these athletes, I felt a connection to the purpose in what they were doing. And then after that had the great fortune of being hired as the chief marketing officer of Martha Stewart, who is epically powerful woman. And I had and have the utmost respect for her. She is a game changer and pioneer in ways that very few are, and unapologetically herself, which was so refreshing because I had worked for these really amazing men at that point, and I'd had great bosses prior to all of this, but Dan and Jay really made a mark on me because of how kind and loving they were as humans, but also how directed and direct and they were as business people. I mean, the style, I was really, again, as an observer, watching these styles and thinking which parts of these different people do I want to bring forward in myself, because I'm modeling. We're all modeling all the time, whether we know it or not. So Martha was the first woman I had worked for who the good, bad, and the ugly shine through. And it took a lot of heat for stuff. Obviously we could go, that could be a whole conversation in and of itself about the Martha Stewart story, but she was, people always say, oh, isn't she so tough and mean? No, she has super high standards and she's going to tell everybody exactly what she wants. And she doesn't want to put up with a bunch of people that aren't giving it their best. And I really relate to that. That isn't, no one enjoys that, you know? So at the heart, I really appreciated a lot of the intentions behind her behavior in a way that allowed me to sort of see things a little bit differently. So she's also the ultimate entrepreneur. And I was there for about a year, and interesting, but I wasn't waking up every day feeling super connected to the purpose. And ultimately, again, it was time. It was time for me to make my entry to entrepreneurship. And I had been thinking about it since the Olympic bid, this women's sports opportunity. So I decide.
Okay, so give that one to me. That's an it has to be me moment. That's a conscious decision to go out on your
100%.
own
Yeah,
and
100%.
leave a high paying job and security and start your own company. I mean, that's a definite choice.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I had been laying the groundwork since the bid because I met a woman who represented female athletes, and I was even thinking about doing it right as I was leaving, but I was so tired. I felt like I was ready to retire after the Olympic bid. I was 32. But I was so exhausted. I was so exhausted from that experience. And I was like, I, I don't know. I think corporate culture sounded, I'd been in big corporate culture prior to that. I think I was just ready for more structure. But the truth is, I love the rolling up the sleeves and figuring stuff out. And when things don't make sense, figuring out how to make them make sense. That is very much in my sort of wheelhouse and skill set, and things that I think sometimes are fun, most of the time, thankfully. So Cheryl and I started this business. She had representation experience. I wanted to build a mini IMG, but focused on the women's side, where we had representation, content, events, consulting, which is the one thing I actually thought we knew how to do. I mean, I knew how to do all these things to a point, but there was a lot of making it up as we went. And she already was representing some athletes at that point. So she taught me the ropes of representation. Suddenly the representation took off. Suddenly I'm a sports agent. That again,
Wow. What was that like?
the last thing on earth I wanted, truthfully, because at the time I actually had like an identity crisis around it, because I grew up in LA and I used to feel like talent agents were a certain way. And suddenly I was an agent. I thought, how did this happen? But the reality is I found it very easy to be an advocate for others and share their stories, to your point. And so prior to starting the company, everyone said, Amy, you're crazy. There's no money in women's sports. I talked to a lot of people about this, very knowledgeable people, and they all said the same thing. There were no people other than maybe the cheerleaders around me who were like, you could do it, Amy. You can do anything you set your mind to. But I think anyone who actually understood the business warned me, and that just made me more motivated to try. And so the representation stuff took off, and suddenly, and my uncle's best friend was the aunt of the top female snowboarder in the world at that time. At this point, I had brought together a handful of female athletes from different sports, some of whom I'd worked with during the Olympic bid. Cheryl had already some athletes. So we had a pretty great little roster. But then suddenly I signed Gretchen Bleiler, and Gretchen, and I thought I was just having an informational conversation with Gretchen, because I was just doing that all the time. Informational conversations left and right. That's what you do. You do that when you're starting a business. You do that when you have a business. I still do that all the time. It's my favorite thing, actually. And so before you know, like in this conversation that I thought was informational, when I'd never seen snowboarding live, I suddenly became Gretchen's sports agent. And I think she believed she just won the silver medal at the Olympics. I think she believed that if I could be the chief marketing officer, Martha Stewart, I could probably be her agent. She was right, thankfully. But I look at those moments and I think, I couldn't have predicted that. And then I went deep into women's snowboarding, became the agent in women's snowboarding. We still represent she was the youngest athlete we signed at that time, Jamie Anderson. She's going back for her 4th Olympics in February. Unbelievable. She's had a baby, 2 actually. It's incredible, so inspiring. But that was really the beginning of our journey in the women's sports space. And then we worked with ESPN to create the first ever ESPNW Women in Sports Summit. And I executive produced that for 7 years. And then, I just suddenly became this expert in the women's sports space. But after the second year of working with Cheryl, we split our ways and I moved back to LA. And then the agency evolved to be still focused on women's sports, but more broadly on this healthy, active living space, which I think more closely mirrors my personal passions. Because as you know, I was a tennis player, but and then eventually I became more sporty, started running marathons and doing triathlons and stuff, but I wasn't ever an athlete in my mind. Still to this day, actually, that's funny, but it's true. So but the fitness and the health and the wellness and the broader sort of taking care of yourself in all the ways made a ton of sense to me, and learning how to do that and helping others do that. And then helping brands and people that are making a meaningful mark in the world and committed to, it could be the democratization of health or creating better for you products or cleaning up the toxins in the world or any of these things. These are the things that excite me, where I know I can be a vehicle for change.
Yeah. So you have since branched out and represent men and women, and your roster is very diverse and reads like the who's who of holistic health doctors, practitioners, experts, authors, sports stars, celebrities, etc. So you spoke before about how your favorite thing to do is having these conversations with people.
Yeah.
So knowing that you're leading a values-driven business and championing other forces for good in the world, what's your criteria for a story that you can really get behind and champion and be an advocate for, as you said before?
Well, I would never have thought I would be running a PR agency, because when I worked in advertising, PR was sort of the afterthought. Now
Yeah.
PR is in many ways a rebrand of what we used to call marketing, because it includes media relations at the center. And yes, that's every month what we're evaluated based on the PR side. But it includes partnerships and influencers and events and experiential and content and all the things we can leverage and create to get this coverage. So, and tell these stories. So, I think that's why I ended up with a PR agency as a huge part of our work. And when I think of how our client base has evolved, even from the very beginning of when we started working on the PR side, the way I would categorize it, I'd say these are philosophy-driven brands. This is still what I call it. So they have a bigger picture vision and purpose in the world. And that could be a brand like Pure Organic, which was the first organic snack bar, which we helped bring to market in a meaningful way and was eventually sold to Kashi, which is part of Kellogg. So we worked with them for 11 years. It was epic story and adventure. And we were a critical part of that equation. So it's like, I really saw the value of our work in such a meaningful way. Then now, I will say it's a luxury, but I feel like we can be more discerning, and I need to be, because we're putting our names, my name is on the door, but now it's S & Co. So it's just a good old S, not the full name, but the putting our name on the door and the sort of our stamp of approval on these things and our words behind their stories means that we have to believe in them and have to know that, I'm not right 100% of the time on this. I've made mistakes, many, where I either misjudged someone or I thought we could do things that we could not do at the same level that I would have hoped to, or, I do really trust my gut on a lot of these people and things. And I have a better understanding of the science and what's real. And I have a lot of people I can consult to vet these people. That's the other thing that is a great asset now. If I have questions about someone or something, I will check with my sources, But the ultimate is to know that like I can get into a room with someone and I'm going to be excited to talk about this person. That's
Mm,
the ultimate test.
yeah. You spoke before about grabbing from these different mentors, their leadership style, their values, the way that they relate to others, lead others. What do you grab from now that you're leading this big team of people that you've grabbed from Martha Stewart, you've grabbed from Jay, these different, your grandparents and so forth? What do you feel like is coming to the fore, as you said?
I think the list of things that were made the most positive impression on me are the values I try to lead with now. So authenticity is at the top of that list, and people being real, and that's not about being perfect. So that was a learning experience for me. That's not about being the good girl. That's not about always saying the right thing. It's not about always being this gentle person, as much as I am a gentle person, but there are moments that I am firm and direct, and I think that that's the full picture. But part of the reason I'm direct is because I value transparency personally. And that was one of the things that was, again, very meaningful to me in the way that I worked with Dan and Jay. It's like I never had to guess. How do they feel? Are they going back and having a separate meeting to talk about how unhappy they are? No, because we know, because they were just yelling and they communicated very clearly how they felt. Now, I'm not a yeller, but I will always just try to be super honest with people, good, bad, and otherwise, because I think that's honoring a relationship, and that's what builds trust, or at least it did with me. I felt like I could trust them because I knew where they stood on stuff. So sometimes I think that's surprising for people. There's a different culture, obviously, between New York and LA. So even the way people work here or the way people respond to some of those things might be different in LA than in New York. But so far so good. And then I think I one of the things that is so fundamental to really everyone in my family, but especially my mother, is having generosity front and center. And there's a lot of different versions of generosity. So generosity is, in my mom's case, oftentimes it's doing super thoughtful things for people. It's gift giving. It's surprises. It's things like that. And generosity, and those are a component of generosity for me. But then another component is time and presence and being able to sort of wherever I am, be there fully as much as possible and not sending 20 emails while I'm on a Zoom with someone, because why am I even there? And I've actually encouraged the team to think about this a lot too, because we're all so distracted and distractible in a way that's not only exhausting, but also so inefficient in the end. Because how dumb is it for us to sit on a call with each other, even when everyone's multitasking? Let's have a 5-minute call where no one's multitasking, or let's not have a call at all and be happier people and save that time, you know? So, just being as present and in the moment as possible. And I'm far from perfect with it. There are times where I'm triaging something and I can't help it. You know, it is what it is. Or I could excuse myself, you know, it's a lot of triage in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all sitting in that inquiry all the time. What drives us? What do we need to take personal responsibility for? How can we be better? I mean, that's a beautiful inquiry to be constantly swimming in. So let's talk about this "it has to be me" moment to write the feminine revolution and share how we can embody these different aspects of ourselves and give full expression to them.
This was definitely a lightning strike in a way that will still confuse me in the good way forever. But I've had others too where I've just known I'm going to do something. Like I knew I was going to start my business. Like I knew that long before I did it. I didn't know what it was going to be or when it was going to be, and I still think it's evolving, so that's fun. But the book I literally woke up one day and I said, I'm going to write a book about femininity. That is bizarre. I still think it's bizarre. And in fact, I was just going through the book thinking, here's the book. I was thinking, I can't believe that this book, because it was 2018, so that was 7 years ago. Crazy. So at that time, everyone was talking about feminism and female empowerment and women's rights, but nobody was talking about this other F word, femininity. And in many ways, that was still like a sign of how limited our scope and vision about where women could go was, because women's rights in many ways rejected femininity. Like there's so many aspects of like the movement was like we don't have to play by the rules, you know? And I think that is actually totally in sync with not playing by the rules. I mean, we have a chapter about unleash your wild woman. Like there's no reason that being a woman or being a feminine woman or playing into your femininity has to have a bunch of rules. And in many ways, that was the intention, was to sort of unlock some of this thinking around this. Because first of all, we're all a combination of masculine and feminine, and that's a great thing. Secondly, everybody would define femininity in a different way. So
and embody it differently.
100%. So the way you would define it and experience it and versus the way I would define it and experience it might be completely different, or we might have some overlap, or we might disagree about aspects of it. Great.
And that's why the quotes throughout the book of different people, different women around the world sharing what their definition of is so useful, because they are different and yet similar, and there's a lot of crossover, and yet they challenge, each other. It's a great part of the book.
Thank you. I like that too, because we didn't want this to be, my writing partner, Catherine, and I did not want for this to be a one size fits all approach. And we did not want for it to feel as if we were prescribing anything, because if anything, the purpose of this was to open up a conversation about what it means to be your authentic self. And even to this day, I mean, it's fun to pick it up and look at parts of it because it stimulates a certain thinking around and questioning and sort of self-evaluation around where we are showing up authentically or where we might still be holding back. And the impetus for me ultimately was I had gone through these different experiences, primarily in my New York life, where I felt like I was in these high-powered work environments where I couldn't show up as my full self because I am an emotional being, highly emotional. I am very sensitive. I am a crier. I definitely felt like none of those things were welcome in the workplace, and most people don't. And I was sort of on a mission to find my full self. And so this book was a journey in helping unlock some parts and then also to free some of them. So in many ways, I mean, this whole notion of research is me search, this was a perfect example of that, because I wanted to really go deeper. And I also at this point had now had a lot of conversations with women and men for that matter that were experiencing some of the same challenges of feeling like they couldn't show up as their full selves, or that they had to sort of hold back certain things in the workplace, or that people only understood part of them. And, here's the reality. I believe that people will always only understand part of us. That's just.
Oh, absolutely. And we have to have boundaries.
Yes.
And we're still understanding ourselves. And it's a constantly evolving conversation that we're having with ourselves, that we bring others in a discerning fashion to be a part of the conversation. And as we age, our understanding of ourselves and these concepts just is constantly evolving. And I think that is one of the overarching messages of the book for me, is that it's a practice. We're all just practicing.
100%.
So try this, the exercises at the end of every chapter. I think it's really interesting that you led with Unleash Your Wild Woman. That's the chapter you chose to lead with now. And I want to ask you about that, because you talk about how you came from a sheltered upbringing and that you were looking to be the good girl, and yet your family in a professional setting were pushing the boundaries of what was possible and starting things from scratch. So there were these mixed messages in this soup of the story. So how does unleashing your wild woman play out for you now?
Well, in a lot of different moments, I would say, where I get to just more fully express myself, good, bad, and otherwise. I had a moment not long ago where I had a rough family dinner and was beside myself and left crying. And then my mom followed me home. I mean, this is still happening to this day. And what a
Really?
gift.
You're having those emotional conversations with your mum too?
Yes, but also that she's following me home at night.
Oh
And
yeah, my mum too.
I was not happy about that because I did not feel comfortable that she's driving at night across town in this state. She didn't see my text, allegedly, that said, let's talk tomorrow. But I wasn't avoiding her, but I just didn't. Yeah, needless to say, I was just so highly emotional and kind of uncharacteristically open about everything that I felt in that moment. And it felt amazing, honestly. And I mean, it easily, we all have these patterns with our different family members and really with anyone in our life. But like, there are aspects that I feel like I certainly hold back and know aren't going to be well received. And I'm literally standing in the street, having this conversation loudly with my mom to the point that she said, "Do you think your neighbors all want to hear this?" And I said, "I don't care. I don't care. They're fine." But it just makes me laugh because it's like, and it's funny that that's the moment that this evokes, but it's also like just making choices about like being brave in the world and taking chances and doing things that you haven't done before, and not, like kind of waking up and going, I want to try something different today. I want to, like, what if I just experiment with being a different version of myself for fun? What would that feel like? Or what if I don't hold back in this conversation the way I normally would, all of it. So like, this is the wild woman. And I mean, I a long time ago, one of my many astrologists slash gurus in the circle of my team had said that my archetype was a female wolf. And it makes perfect sense to me on a number of levels. Which that's again a longer conversation, but I when I think of the wild woman, and it's not a coincidence that there's a book that literally talks about women running with the wolves, but I think there is something about it that really makes sense to me. It's like there is that sort of wild, like there's a wild wolf within every one of us, and it feels good sometimes to let her out and for her to just roar and do her thing. And like, she's vicious at times and she's vulnerable at other times and she's all the things. That's the wild woman, and it feels, I don't know. So that's the image that it evokes for me. But it's the opposite of feeling limited.
I just feel free when I think about it.
Yeah.
Just the freedom to go in whatever direction you want to go in. That feels wild to me. It hasn't been tamed. There's no containment. It doesn't have to be manicured. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be performative. It doesn't have to be fully made up. It doesn't have to be fully formed.
So true. That is a relief in a day when we're all trying to show up a certain way
and fit into certain containers.
Yeah.
Of what other people expect. And I mean, there was so many things that came up for me as I was reading that chapter. Some other things that are coming up for me as I'm listening to you and I'm imagining your mother and you standing in the dark in the street with some lights or something. I've got this whole picture of you and Jan talking. Yeah. Is the Be Emotional chapter, which is the first, which is number 1 of the 21.
Yes.
And this idea that we don't get to be emotional because we're an angry woman or we're crying too much or we're too this or too that. And I love how you frame it as being sensitive and being in tune with your emotional intelligence. That it's a superpower. Being able to read people is a gift and feeling before you speak is a gift. That's what I got from that chapter. So
Definitely.
tell me how being emotional is a superpower for you as a woman and as a leader.
Well, the sensitivity piece is front and center for me. And I definitely, that's a perfect example of where I would get performance reviews that would say, oh, you're very sensitive. Don't take things so personally. Um, so I tried to squeeze it out of me, you know? I mean, of course, that's not possible, but I definitely felt like very
That's like putting Pandora back in the box. She doesn't go back
yeah,
in the box.
no. Sensitive Amy is not welcome here. Okay, noted. But again, the whole book is about these feminine qualities that have historically been perceived as weaknesses.
Yeah.
So sensitivity and emotionality are great examples of it, where those might have seemed like that had a derogatory kind of intention behind them. But the reality is sensitivity is what makes me so great at my job. Sensitivity is why I walk in the office and I see something's a little off with one of my employees and I can grab her and say, hey, what's going on? Let's connect quickly. And then I can most likely solve whatever the issue is if it has anything to do with anything work related. Or she feels better just that someone's paying attention, you know, or my sensitivity is what allows me in a client meeting to be able to read between the lines and actually hear what the client's saying, not just the words that they're speaking. And so though the sensitivity is undoubtedly a superpower in all aspects of our lives, you know, we're able to, and I think it's extremely underrated and that even still to this day, because the fact that we're sensing each other all the time. You know, I'm sensing you in this conversation. I'm sensing, you know, where we're going or what's resonating, and that's allowing us to truly connect. Someone told me this week, it was so interesting, that it takes a certain amount of time. I think it's like 20 minutes or something before two people are actually kind of syncing brain waves on some level. And it actually is supposed to be a science thing, and I'm not going to be able to quote it as a science thing. Now I'm a secondhand storyteller, but I thought it was so interesting because it made so much sense to me in that I know exactly what that feels like. Like with almost any person, you could sit down and you could start having a conversation about almost anything. And at first you're like, oh, this is going to be tough. Like maybe I'm not going to connect with this person, or this topic is boring or whatever, you know, potentially. Not with everyone. I mean, I think more times than not, that's not the case, thankfully, but there are times, you know, like if we're interviewing someone, but then there is a point in the conversation where you start to connect on a human level that's different. And I think it is energetic, and it's because of what we're sensing and experiencing together. So it's pretty awesome, actually. And it's fun because the more you tap into that sensitivity and the more you pay attention to the signs and realize what you're seeing and feeling and hearing and learning, the more you can put that put that to good use, you know, a superpower for good.
Yeah, let's talk about owning our intuition. You talked about that before. We're going to talk about intuition later. Let's make sure we do that, because that was one of my favorite chapters of the book. You know, hear what you hear, see what you see, act on what you know to be true, use the deep well of your feminine intuition, and connect with the power of your own wisdom. So they're all bleeding in with each other all the time. You know, these superpowers, we're just pulling it out of our bag of tools. So how does that play out for you? What's your sense of that?
Well, so my mom was a real warrior from forever. She still is, maybe more so. And she loved that book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker.
Yes.
And, you know, that was a bestseller, like an instant bestseller. And I think that the name of
it's a great title.
Right into, you know, clickbait. But yes, but it's funny because now, if anything, I appreciate it even more, because the real premise of that book was that we have the ability to sense things in a way that we are actually protected. So while that might be a terrifying name and seem kind of like doom and gloom, it's actually the opposite, which is if we're paying attention, we have the tools to be effective and we're protected, you know, like people. And when bad things happened, we're so often able to say, oh yeah, I kind of saw that coming, or I had a hunch something was a little off. Or I mean, you think about how many times that happens, you know, or even in relationships with people where you go like, something just didn't feel quite right in that conversation. But needless to say, I mean, we really do have it is a superpower. And this whole notion of trusting your gut, like, you know, in the workplace, that is not historically in the boardroom, let's just say. And if someone is presenting, they're not going to say, you know, I really want to move forward with this plan because my intuition tells me this is the right way to go. They have to prove it with all the charts and documentation and be able to show all of these things. And I'm not saying gut over all of those things. I'm saying it's the two together. It's like the secret weapon that makes us the most powerful, is if we have all the information and then we can use our intuition on top of it to make the ultimate decision. And I mean, for me, the way it plays out is I'm highly decisive because I can read all the information quickly, and then I use my gut to make the call. So, but that's speaking of practices, that's the ultimate practice. You know, it's like no one just trusts their gut one day and just feels great about it. Like you have to get up, you have to do that with little things and go, okay, this seemed to work out. I trusted my gut that this person would like this gift, or that this conversation, if I handled it this way, would work out this way, or, you know, all those little sort of practices. But then ultimately, then you can keep up leveling to where you're using it for the big things. And
again, we're just practicing. We're practicing, and we get better at what we practice at. I want to talk about the surrender chapter, because this was the chapter that I made the most notes with. I was like, yep. And maybe, you know, it probably resonated with me because that's the one I struggle with the most, is surrendering. Yeah. But some of the things that really spoke to me is surrender is how fighting ends. Resist the steady diet of struggle. Let go and surrender to what is. Accept, listen to your instincts, get in the natural flow. So I want to ask you about that young girl that was stressed all the time. And there was something you said in the book, that you don't attach personal success or failure to everything that happens anymore. That you've chosen, or you keep choosing to take the pressure off of yourself. And I'd love to ask you about that practice that you're constantly reminding yourself of.
Yes.
Asking for a friend, asking for me, asking for you, listener.
Yeah. Well, yes. Have you read The Surrender Experiment?
Yes, it's
one of my favorite books. Yeah,
Such
it was really transformative. I have a bunch of copies that I give to people because we all need this all the time, and this reminder. And that is not even a book. Like, it's surprising to me how much I love that book, but mainly because as you're reading it, it seems so ridiculous. So many of the stories are like, this is absurd, right? But then you just keep surrendering, and it keeps getting better and better and better. And it's a true story. So like, you can't dispute it. But yeah, highly recommend. But I think, so I had this conversation with this woman. I mean, of course, it sounds like all I do is just sit around with psychics and astrologers. Which, you know, if it were up to me,
your business is proof that that's not the case.
Yeah, that's true. Although I do have a crystal here, just in case you were wondering.
Oh, and I've got my crystal too. Come on, let's sit with crystals. Come on, it's great.
No, I'm into it. But the truth is, this woman who at the place I was getting my nails done is a bit of a psychic, and she said, I have a message for you. Would you like it? And I'm never going to say no to that. She's a facialist. I wasn't even seeing her. She just happened to be there at the same time. She comes over and sits down next to me, and she says, so Amy, and what's interesting is I was literally just starting to think about writing this book at the time when this happened. She said, Amy, you believe that the good and the bad things that happen to you are a result of you. And you know, at first I was like, oh, like horrified. Like, it makes it sound like I'm this like braggart and I'm running around patting myself on the back. And if anything, quite the opposite, you know, like I felt like I never gave myself any credit for anything. And in a way, yeah, I was a little traumatized by this comment. But then I thought about it more and realized that it was like taking all the pressure off because,
Mm.
and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about this illusion of control, and that we all think we're in charge of something. Even me being thinking I'm in charge of my business. I mean, sure, I'm responsible for my business and I have some decision making abilities, but to say I am in charge of or in control is completely insane. That I'm in control would be insane because every day 12 things happen that I wasn't expecting. I did not, many of which I did not choose or would not choose. And, and some for the best, but it's like this illusion of control is what locks us into feeling like we're trapped, or we have to make this decision, or so it's incredibly freeing when you just come to the conclusion that actually we're part of this other thing, right? We're part of this ecosystem. Everybody is moving around in this ecosystem, and the more in like micro decisions, again, a practice that we can just let go of the attachment to an outcome, or the attachment to like defining good or bad based on what happens or how it happens, the more joy there is in life. Because, you know, I, again, I was a perfectionist and very like high achiever, and grades in school make it easy to see certain things. And now there's other measures for success, but it's, I'm still hard on myself. So let's just be very clear. Like there are times that I am still practicing this letting go, but to a large degree, I just don't get as caught up in the highs and the lows in the same way. I don't attach so much to any of it in a way where I'm going, oh, this is the best thing ever, or oh, this is the worst thing ever. And that allows me in times like there's a challenging business thing that happened and is happening, and at first I was really thrown by it, but now I'm like, it's part of this ecosystem, and I could just as easily focus on these other really epic magical things that are happening over here, um, or I could just sit here, right? And these will go on and these will go on, and it's all part of the picture. And you kind of never know. And that's, again, going back to that story about the Olympic bid and where this job came out of left field, and I could never have predicted it. And it's so much more magical than I could have ever imagined. That's because of the surrender, right? That was a letting go moment where I went, oh, you know what? I can't imagine this is for me, but I'm just going to let it roll. Let's see what happens, right? And
Yeah.
you don't do that enough,
Well,
It's
this
so,
idea that we do surrender to the idea and the truth that we are part of something bigger,
yeah,
and that everything that happens can serve us. And a lot of the book subverts your expectation or understanding of something, kind of like Consolations by David White. It's a book that I refer to on literally a daily basis. I love it. Our understanding of certain concepts of how we're holding certain things. And
yeah,
the Be Agreeable chapter at first glance appears to be antithetical to the whole notion of unleash your wild woman and be who you want to be and be expressive and all the things. But then when we dive into it, it makes complete sense that that's one of the 21 calls to action. Social literacy, caring for others, reading the room, being sensitive, behaving appropriately, being kind, polite, random acts of kindness. That is part of claiming our role as leaders of the world in terms of how we want to model loving and caring behavior.
yeah.
So but it can be challenging. I'm sort of thinking this out aloud, so it's sort of coming out, spewing out of me as I'm thinking it through and feeling into it. This idea of being authentic, speaking our truth, but at the same time honoring the offers of others, and how the soup that we create together in the moment is part of this bigger picture. So how does being agreeable play out for you?
I had this client a couple of years ago who was a very tough Israeli man, and he was extremely aggressive in ways that caught me off guard. And yet I think his intentions were good. But at times, like the way he would negotiate and the demands were so it's off-putting, honestly, at the time, because and kind of jarring. And at one point, after I had already felt pretty beat up, he made a comment like, Amy, you are creating, I'm trying to bring us together, and you are, he didn't use this word. I've heard this word from another person, not about myself specifically, but creating againstness. And I thought it was such an interesting concept, againstness, right?
Yeah.
And so now I think about that sometimes where I go, okay, and by the way, you used the word boundaries earlier. I don't think they're againstness and boundaries are that different. I think so in this case, I was setting boundaries, right? But then if you reframe it as againstness, it's interesting because if there are places where we're inadvertently creating againstness, which is the opposite of being agreeable. This is why I'm coming back.
Yeah.
Then we unintentionally are making things harder for ourselves than we need to be, right? So I have an employee recently where I realized what she really needs from me the most. I'm not happy with kind of the current state of things, and she's epic person and very well intentioned, but results wise, we're not there. And I realized she needs cheerleading. That's what she needs from me, you know? And so as much as I wanted to like set more structure and goals and all the things that I would do for myself,
Yeah.
I realized what she needs is a different approach, which is cheerleading. And it's not agreeableness in like, let's just pretend this isn't happening and be complacent. That's very different, you know? It's more of it's an energy and an approach and a softness and again, like kind of tapping into some of our more subtle superpowers around relational behavior. How are we interacting with each other? We unconsciously often know what the other person needs, but if we're distracted by what we need in that moment, that could cloud our ability or prevent us from even being able to bring that forward, which could actually help us with the sort of long-term need, if you know what I mean. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about meeting others in that place of openness, vulnerability. You talk about Brene Brown in the book, and her TED Talk is one of the most viral, most watched TED Talks in the world. It's such a beautiful exploration of vulnerability being a superpower. So you spoke before early on how you surrendered, you were in your flow state, you allowed yourself to be carried by your intuition and what interested you at the time. Your curiosity was something that you really anchored yourself to, or that's my interpretation of what I've been hearing. Following your desires, that emotional and spiritual freedom, embracing uncertainty, all that sort of stuff, while you're unleashing your wild woman as we think about it, but at the same time, removing artifice, making space for others, asking for help, developing that closeness, seeing what other people need, being sensitive and emotional, letting go of the responsibility for their feelings, but at the same time, tapping into what they may need. That has to be a superpower as a leader, I would imagine, so that you can adjust your leadership style for each team member, and then how you get team members to collaborate whilst at the same time sharing their service of the same mission. So talk me through you making friends with your vulnerability and not seeing it as a weakness. You call the chapter Show Your Weakness, but then again, upend that and show it as a strength. How's that playing out for you as you age?
I still think I'm struggling with this one, truthfully. I mean, I perceive myself to be very vulnerable. but then for some reason others don't. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There are times where I will have what I perceive to be a very vulnerable conversation with someone. They don't respond as if it was a very vulnerable conversation. It's like they still think I'm fine. Maybe because I seemed calm as I communicated this information. I have no idea, but
And yet you cry all the time. You cry a lot.
I mean, yeah, I cry, I think, less than I used to, and maybe
Mm.
that's the problem. Maybe I need to get back to a higher crying volume, and that would be it's something to think about. I'll see if I can ramp up my crying and see if
No,
that.
no, I wasn't.
No,
That
no, I'm
wasn't where I was
joking.
going with
I'm
that.
totally
No,
joking.
it was more just, what does that feel like for you to feel as though you are expressing how you're feeling in the moment and wanting other people to see you, and then feeling like you haven't been seen the way that you want to? What does that feel like for you?
The great news is the people that are close to me can see me and my vulnerability fully. So I have like
Mm.
a certain circle of people
So
that
you're speaking at work, is that what you
I
mean?
don't even know, just circumstantially, where
Okay.
some like I can't even think can't put my finger on one circumstance, but I think there have been multiple circumstances where someone I know that it wasn't read as vulnerability, even if I was sharing something very personal, from my perspective. Um, I found it odd. I do find it odd when it happens because I mean you when it's a vulnerable moment, we all lean in. That's like just human nature to like lean in to help. So and the truth is, like, when I'm in a vulnerable state, it's not that I need everyone to do something about it. Sometimes I just want to be heard and acknowledged and know someone is a witness. I think it's one of the
Yeah.
weird things about being single is in this moment I am single. I it's we As much as I have a lot of witnesses around me, like my mother and some of my very best friends who witnessed me, and all the people that I work with that see me every day. There's something that's so important about being seen in that way and having someone kind of tracking you and keeping tabs, And I think for me, in the vulnerable moments, that's what I'm looking for, is a witness.
Mm.
And the crying, I mean, I don't know, I almost cried just then. Just a little tiny feeling of it almost could have happened. But
Yeah.
I
I
more
cry every
because
day, multiple times a day. I think it's the
yeah,
most beautiful
one
expression and release and
definitely. I'm a
an
crying
act of
advocate.
permission. I find it really productive, if that's the
Yeah.
right word. But
No,
uh,
me too.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
an advocate for crying for sure. And I
It's
think
interesting as you're speaking, I'm thinking of that Susan Sarandon speech in Shall We Dance, where she talks
mm,
about, why do you think people couple up? It's
mm,
so that you have a witness. I will be your witness. I'm promising to care about all the things, all the little things, the big things every day, you know? And so a conversation I had recently with somebody about how grief is meticulous in its work, and for it to mean something, it has to be witnessed. And
mm,
as I was exploring that concept, I thought, well, actually, every emotion actually needs a witness. It's sort of how we validate, or how we feel seen, or how we trust what's going on somehow. Again, I'm finding my way into that as I'm talking to you. But um, one of my favorite chapters of the book is Love Fully, which is number 21. It's a beautiful way to end the book, and it really speaks to me on every level at any time, but particularly now,
mm,
where I would love for love to be a currency that's exchanged more broadly between people who disagree,
mhm,
and is needed more than ever, recognizing that it is the most powerful force in the world, and to share it and express it is the core of our power, but as a force for good, as you've been communicating with us. But again, this flow, being in the flow of your emotions, leaving fear behind, loving with your whole heart, not holding back. So using those challenging, painful moments as training, as opportunities to learn, making love a daily practice. What is the loving choice for you in the moment was a phrase in the book that really stood out to me. So as you talk about wanting that witness, but at the same time acknowledging that you have these witnesses, what does loving fully feel like for you and look like for you?
It's the macro and the micro. My mom's the ultimate romantic. So
Oh, that story of her getting with the quarterback of the, high school football team, that was a great story when she got
so
married
crazy,
again.
man. Yeah.
She manifested that.
She's a master manifester. There's no doubt about it. And I am too, just not romantically yet.
There you go. I'm so glad you put the yet on that.
Yes, of course.
You're going to practice.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll practice with you.
Okay, great.
I need to
Excellent.
practice that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this chapter in some ways is the key to it, because it's loving fully is a recognition that the giving love creates the existence of love. That we are entirely responsible for the love in our life. Mm-hmm. And it is here. It is here. It is omnipresent. It is, and sometimes it's really hard to remember that, because for so many reasons, like how we feel in a moment, an experience we had, whatever, the traumas from the past, heartbreak, etc. But when I think of what that means in practice, it means like going all in spite of all of that. Mm-hmm. And that could be in any kind of relationship. I mean, even this idea of the againstness and overcoming againstness, it's about what is the loving choice in the moment. It is how do we approach this, if that's our MO, is and not in a cheesy, we're just going to be loving all the time, not getting any work done, or we're going to just be loving all the time, even if people aren't receiving us or responding that way. Like, the truth is, we get to choose how we show up. And that in many ways is the determinant of not just how others perceive us or experience us, but how we feel. Yeah. So that's, I think, at the heart of this chapter, which is the loving fully is what brings the maximum love in our life. It's up to us.
Yeah. I want to read just a couple of sentences from the book that really sum up the message of this beautiful book. Take control, even though we've sort of upended what control is, but take control and let go. Be good and be wild. Dream big and take action. Take care of others and let yourself be taken care of. Be mysterious and be open. Lean in and lean back. Be your glorious, complex, powerful self. You don't just contain contradictions, you embrace them. You celebrate them. Find yours and make them sing. That is what I'm going to take away from this book, among many other things. So thank you for this beautiful offering. One of the many things about books is that they're there in print. It's a scary thing once you've written it and you can't change it, but it's there as this beautiful offering that sits in people's homes and in their hearts. And this book will certainly sit in mine. So thank you for it. So I always close every episode with the same question, which is, when you have a dream in your heart and you feel like you don't have what it takes to make it happen, what do you say to yourself?
This is the moment where the surrender comes in. I say and my grandfather, so two things. My grandfather was sort of the source of all these one-liners that live in my consciousness constantly. One of his lines is, "It will all work out in the end, and if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end."
Yes.
And then another, which I literally have imprinted on so many different things because I like as many of these reminders around as possible. He would always say, "Keep smiling."
Well, that's a lovely place to button this for today. Yeah. Thank you for how you show up in the world. And thank you for how you champion other people that are changing the world and being a force for good.
Thank you, Tess. I loved our conversation. Thanks for all of your thoughtfulness.
Oh, so many great takeaways. Watch people you admire and look at which parts you want to bring forward in yourself. So Amy was looking at Dan and Jay and Martha Stewart and their leadership and communication styles, the way that they related to others, how they handled situations to fine tune and develop her own style. We are all modeling all the time, whether we know it or not. And being clear about the values that you lead with. For Amy, it's authenticity, transparency, generosity, time, and presence. It was interesting what she was saying about the fact that we're also distracted and distractible. And it is exhausting and inefficient to multitask. So just relishing what's available in the present moment. And there is so much joy about making value-driven choices. I love her check-in questions. What drives you? What do you need to take personal responsibility for? How can you be better? And the feminine revolution is all about exploring how we can embody these different parts of ourselves and give full expression to them, and reframing qualities that have historically been perceived as weaknesses as superpowers, that we make the rules. So where are you showing up authentically and where are you holding yourself back? And how we hold the various parts of ourselves changes. And it starts with permission and having a lot of compassion and love for how we can show up in the world. So Amy was very honest about the fact that she struggles with balancing her business persona and the sensitive emotional parts of herself that she gives herself permission to express in her personal life. And that our knowing of ourselves is constantly evolving. We're all just practicing. And we get to choose what we practice, and we get better at what we practice. So owning our intuition and being in the flow. So Amy trusted those moments of intuition and allowed them to guide her through the different transitions. Allow yourself to be carried by your intuition and what interests you. Be led by your curiosity. Hear what you hear, see what you see. Act on what you know to be true. Use the deep well of your feminine intuition and connect with the power of your own wisdom. Trust your gut. I loved when she said it's the secret weapon that protects us. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. And that we are the most powerful when we have the information and then we use our intuition on top of that to make the decision. So Amy's highly decisive because she can read all the information quickly and then she uses her gut to make the call. And trusting your gut is a practice. That you start by trusting your gut with little things, and then you're able to up level to trust your intuition with the bigger things. And the power of surrender. That surrender is how fighting ends. So resist the diet of steady struggle. Let go and surrender to what is. Accept, listen to your instincts, and get in that natural flow state. Take the pressure off for things to look a particular way and let go of the illusion of control. It does keep us trapped. So surrendering to the truth that we're part of something bigger and that everything happens to serve us helps us to let go of the attachment to outcome and the attachment to personal success or failure with everything that happens. There's so much more joy when we free ourselves from that. And that being emotional is a superpower. That then we're able to tap into our powers of relational behavior. That sensitivity, being in tune with our emotional intelligence, is something that we absolutely need to bring into every relationship. Being able to read people and feel before we speak. Noticing what other people need. So that example that she gave about her employee that needed cheerleading in order to thrive. And we do often know what other people need. But if we're distracted by what we need, then it clouds our ability to bring that intuition forward. But the more we tap into our sensitivity and pay attention to the signs of what we're seeing, hearing, and feeling, then the more we can put what we learn to good use. And sharing our vulnerabilities is a strength. The Be Agreeable chapter really subverted some stuff for me. I really love this term that she's using, againstness. That where are we making things harder than they need to be? Where are we creating that againstness when it doesn't need to be there? So we can follow our desires, we can be authentic, we can speak our truth, we can advocate for ourselves, but at the same time, we can make space and honor the offers and needs of others. That this soup that we're creating together in the moment is part of the much bigger picture. And then unleashing your wild woman and running with the wolf in you doesn't have to be aggressive or, overpower other people. It's about being brave, taking chances and doing things that we haven't done before, just experimenting with different versions of ourselves. Like, what would that feel like if I did it this way as opposed to the way that I've always done it? Leaning into the freedom that comes when we give ourselves permission to go in whatever direction we want to go in. That it's not tamed, there's no containment, but it doesn't have to be polished or perfect or fully formed. It doesn't have to be performative or even public. It is just such a relief to take the pressure off to show up in a certain way, that we can free ourselves of the need to fit into the container of the expectations of others and choosing to love fully. Being in the flow of our emotions, leaving fear behind, loving with our whole hearts, not holding back, using the challenging moments as training, as opportunities to learn, and that love is a daily practice. What is the loving choice in the moment? What did she say? Giving love creates the existence of love. We are responsible for the love in our lives, and it's omnipresent if we choose to see it. And being open to all possibilities, that something more extraordinary than you could ever possibly imagine can happen. And when that happens, it's a reminder that we don't need to wrestle to make things happen. I like how she says to herself, I can't imagine this for me, but I'm just going to let it roll. Let's just see what happens. And I love that wisdom from her dad. It will all work out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, then it's not the end. Oh, get your copy of The Feminine Revolution, 21 Ways to Ignite the Power of Your Femininity for a Brighter Life and a Better World. Oh, I took so much away from that book. I absolutely loved it. And you can connect with Amy and Stanton and company. All the links are in the show notes. And I'd love to hear how you define femininity. There's all these great quotes throughout the book and everybody's defining it slightly differently, but they all intersect. So leave a note in the Facebook group and please leave a review and share what resonated with you from this episode.
I want to hear about your It Has To Be Me story. So head on over to ithastobeme.com/stories to share it in our free community. You can also join the conversations we're having about this episode and others. I'm Tess Masters. Join me next week and we'll dive inside another great story to help us go from dreaming to doing.